White Sox left Comiskey Park and played their games in other stadiums. And every other Sunday, the Negro League played. This is right after World War II. And when I was working for my dad, and there were a couple of guys who worked for my dad, pressing pants for 12 cents a pair. And they take me to ball games on Sunday because, I always played ball. The best ball I played was in the Army, actually. But anyway, and so I got to know that because my skin was different, I was going to have a better life than they did. I mean, they knew it too. I learned that when I was 14, 15. So I was always sensitive. And you have to understand, when you have a war against a minority, like we did in Vietnam, and not in the Ukraine, not against Russia, but when we had wars like we did, in the famous war in Grenada, it's racial. It turns out to be racial for the kids doing it because that's the only way they can cope. It's just anyway. And so I grew up and I worked part-time, and when I graduate, I got a ride to school. University of Chicago. Was a smart kid, and we sold everything. My mother finally moved to California. I have a brother too who took care of her. I had her for 4 years, and then my brother had her. Had to take care of my mom. I had older sisters who were married and split as soon as they could, and so I came up not from the Harvard Crimson or the Yale Daily News. I come up from a kid from nowhere. If you remember John R. Tunis, his wonderful books, The Kid from Tompkinsville, about a kid who played center field as a 19-year-old rookie for the Dodgers. Anyway, I came up, and in 69, I'm sticking two fingers in the eye of a president, Nixon, newly elected, right in his eye. And am I in the gulag for it? No. I'm fame, fortune, and glory. I won every prize, Pulitzer Prize, all this stuff. And so I'm not knocking America. I'm just knocking these guys' version of America because that's not the right America.
Oh, and look, I agree.
Why hasn't anybody in your office sent me that article? When you're done, have somebody send me an email and I'll give you my just make a PDF of those pages. I want to read that stuff.
Yeah,
I knew who he was, the guy who wrote it.
Look at just to show you some of the articles we've been writing in the magazine. This is the cover. We sent it to you. That's after your article came out. Who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline? We will bring an end to it. I promise you. We quoted Biden back in September. These are just some of the articles, one after another. We've been writing.
It's so interesting you say that because nobody's asked that question yet of the president in a news conference. In 4 days, it blew up on the 26th. And I think look, I'm not in Joe's mind. And
well, if you're not in Joe's mind, you'd be out of your mind if you were in Joe's mind.
I just mean by that, I don't know. I know what his deputies do. I know what Blinken and Nuland and Sullivan know. They applauded the overthrow of the government and the Maiden overthrow in 2014. They orchestrated it. We know all that.
Yep.
And we know they're dead set. And we had a Secretary of State, Blinken, go to China after delaying because of a balloon. He delayed visiting China because of a balloon. An F-22 shut it down.
Yeah, I know. We wrote about it. Yep. It's like $400 million or something to do.
And you know what the pilot did?
There you go. There's the cover.
Oh, yeah.
Up goes the weasel.
You guys are wild, man.
Yeah.
So who reads you? What's your circulation?
Oh, no, we have it. It's an international magazine. At one time, I used to be on Oprah, the Today Show, Good Morning America. I used to be on everybody. And I have best-selling books, Trends 2000, Trend Tracking. And I did
know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they blacklisted me when I said what would happen with the Afghan war. And you said you're from the South, South Chicago. By the way, I lived in Chicago for 7 years.
Where? Depends on where, buddy.
Well, I was up in Evanston, but I worked in the city.
Come on.
All right. I'm just saying. But I'm a Napolitano that grew up in the Bronx.
I grew up on 47th Street in the South Side.
Yeah, it's a whole different trip.
Public school. We played against the Catholic school 2 blocks away. We played on every sport against them, and it was always bloody. I'm talking about we played touch football, tackle football with no equipment. and
Right, look,
you played basketball with elbows in the mouth every time you went up. And it was really, Chicago's very gritty. It's a great, and by the way, Chicago's become, I hate to say it, Daley started it. I mean, it's become an amazing city. And it's got all these racial problems, but at least they look at them. And it's got that lakefront that they did a spectacular job on. But, um, but they're losing it on the shooting stuff, aren't they?
yeah. But anyway, so when you talk about how you grew up, I grew up in the Bronx. We social climbed to Yonkers later on.
Oh, that's a big jump, man.
But so I understand what you say because we didn't, our daddies, like these other guys, we're not born on third base, and so we have a different passion of life because we're fighters and we had to fight our way up to get where we are. As I say, it's Harvard, Princeton, Yale, bullets, bombs, and banks. As George Carlin said, it's one big club and you ain't in it. And that's the club in control. So when you say this isn't about not liking America, it's about our loss of the America that we used to love so much.
Well, it's there. It's still there, but it's funny you mentioned George Carlin because he should be required viewing. Although he offends a lot of people, he does a thing on the church that doesn't help anything. But anyway, he was a genius. Look, I was in, for $2 to cover, $1 cover, you could go listen to the best jazz in the world, Miles Davis and for there's a place called on 46th Street. You could go hear I'm serious. You could hear everybody, Condito, and you could also go listen to Lenny Bruce. Talk about how God is merchandising. What's for sale this week, and for all the priests to push. It was just awful but funny, and he of course was coked up anyway. And you also could get anything you wanted back then. We called it Mary Jane.
Yeah.
Well, I covered police in Chicago as a kid for the City News Bureau, which is the old crime business. And you learn a lot of the cops. There was two things they would do, but I worked night shifts and, they would come in and it'd be pretty nice if they had a little extra stuff. They caught some dope, but they throw a bag at us. And they used to always give us the 8mm porn movies. We could watch those on the camera. This is back in the 60s, 61. And so when you do that, the only thing you couldn't do in Chicago is you couldn't report on crooked cops, of which there were plenty. And you couldn't report about the cops and their deals with the Giancana mob on West Street, the big play street. So I learned early on, it was a tyranny, really. I mean, I learned about censorship right away as a kid reporter. You couldn't do it. If some guy at the cop station up in the near north side of Chicago, where all the bars were and the play places were, if they reported some guy that had 11 bullet holes in him as a traffic accident, forget about it. You can't go and say, "What do you mean traffic accident?" That was a mob hit. I grew up in that world too. I mean, I knew about the mob.
Yeah.
And it ended up, one of the things I did for the New York Times after the war was over, I did a 6 months with a wonderful reporter named Jeff Girth on a guy named Sidney Korshak that ran the mob in Chicago. And that was about as much fun as putting your head in a foxhole or climbing into it. I got more death threats, but this stuff doesn't compare to what growing up in Chicago trained you to not worry about what the New York Times and Washington Post thinks about my stories. And that's what makes Substack so interesting. I didn't know about it. A terrific journalist, old time friend of mine, Matt Taibbi, who's doing good.
Yeah, I follow him.
He said, you can publish here. You'll be fine. A lot of people read it. And so it's an alternative form. But getting back to the real story, what is the end game? And